What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Brandi Harvey. I am so excited that you have decided to join us for today's Vault Empowers Talks. Now, you guys, before we even get going, I want you to like, comment, share, but most of all, subscribe, because we have some exciting conversations on the way for you. But here's what I'm excited about. Today is the first day we are talking and discussing about Women Without Kids. This is our first book, you guys. It's our first book. So I'm excited to have this conversation with Ruby Warrington. She does not know I've been fangirling out for her for some months now since we've got getting her on this show. So I'm excited for the conversation. So if you're ready to join me, I'm going to introduce you to Ruby Warrington. Ruby Warrington is a British-born author, editor, and publishing consultant. She is considered to be a book doula and disseminator of ideas, recognized as a true thought leader in the wellness space. Ruby has the unique ability to identify issues that are destined to become a part of the cultural narrative. Her previous books include Material Girl, Mystical World, Sober Curious, and The Sober Curious Reset. I'm excited, though, to talk about her latest book right here, Women Without Kids. Welcome to Vault Empowers Talks, Mrs. Ruby Warrington.
Brandi, thank you so much for having me.
I have been on like a cloud waiting for this conversation the last couple weeks. I'm so excited to talk about this book. I think it's so important. And I was telling you off camera, you have given voice to so many women like myself.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was so great just to hear you sharing how much this book has impacted you. You know, the subtitle of the book is The Revolutionary Rise of an Unsung Sisterhood. And as a woman without kids, you know, I always really felt like I was the only one. It can be a very lonely path when all of our friends, family members, colleagues are kind of getting on that train. They're all starting to start families and have kids. It can feel like you're the only one. But what I realized as I sort of moved through my 40s into my mid 40s even, that actually I knew a lot of women without kids. There were a lot of other women without kids in my life. Many of us had different reasons, but we hadn't ever really had a reason to like find each other. And so that's where this idea of this unsung sisterhood. There's a sisterhood of women without kids. It's just that we haven't had the opportunity to like find each other and talk about what it's like to walk this path. You know, it can feel very lonely. It can feel very isolating. And so one of the goals with the book was to help other women without kids find each other. And start to have some conversations about what it feels like to not have children.
What it feels like. I have to, and I told you, you know, I'm one of those people, if we ask you to come on the show and you have a book, I read the book, okay?
Yes, you did.
And so let me tell you why I was even more excited. I was in Miami and I'm sitting on the patio, I'm delving into this book, and page 8 jumps out at me. And you say this: as such, I'm speaking to the ones who've never wanted to be mothers, the ones who are teetering on the fence, the ones who've tried and failed to become parents, and the ones for whom it just hasn't happened. This book is for the ones who don't have wombs and who feel anything but barren. It is for those whom health issues and other disabilities have blocked the path to parenthood. It is for anybody whose sexual orientation or gender expression has written them out of the heteronormative story about what it means to start a family. And it is even for those moms who have found themselves in the flat, scooped out quiet of a 3 a.m. feeding, questioning where the fuck their minds, identities, their lives have gone. The ones who sometimes whisper, wish they didn't have kids. I was literally like, oh, no, she didn't. I was so excited because you encompassed every feeling and every woman, because this is not just a one-sided conversation.
No, it's not. And so often what I found is somebody who had consciously chosen not to have kids, the terminology for that is sort of child-free.
Yeah.
And it comes with some specific kind of connotations about maybe being quite carefree, maybe being quite hedonistic, maybe not really having given it much consideration. None of this is how I felt about my decision not to have children. It was a decision that I made over decades of really deep inquiry into what was the right path for me. And I feel so grateful to have come of age and been born in a culture where I actually got to ask those questions and come to this decision very consciously. But then on the other hand, there's the childless community, who were sort of people who desperately wanted to have children and for whatever reason weren't able to. And I felt the whole kind of conversation around women without kids was very divided in this binary, the child-free versus almost like the childless, right? Whereas actually in reality, of all the women without kids, there is such diversity about why we might find ourselves in this position. You know, it's thought that actually 80% of people who don't have children are childless by circumstance, meaning that had circumstances played out differently, had their finances been in a different shape, had their career played out differently, had they met the right person to co-parent with, maybe they would have had children. It wasn't necessarily one conscious decision. More it was the result of lots of small decisions based on, I don't know, self-preservation, survival even, that have led to a place where they don't have children. And then of course there are all the other reasons, health issues, sexuality, gender, et cetera, that could lead people to being without kids, right? And so I wanted to write a book that was very inclusive and that that included anybody who identified as a woman without, and including, as you noted, even moms who sometimes feel like, I don't want mother to be my whole identity. I want to stay connected to the woman that I am without my kids. Because I've heard from so many people, from so many mothers, especially women who have born in a culture that says, you're a woman, you can do whatever you want with your life now. You know, your choices aren't limited. You can pursue all kinds of goals, so pursue whatever kind of a life you want. Women who've had that degree of freedom and autonomy in their lives, which is actually very new. It's only very recent, really, that women have had that. To lose all of that when you become a mother can feel very, scary. I think it's a contributor to postpartum depression. Can feel, again, very isolating because you're not allowed as a mother to voice anything other than, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. I found my calling, you know?
Absolutely.
So I wanted to include those women too and say it's okay to maintain your identity as a woman without kids, even when you become a mom.
I mean, I feel like that hits so close to home with me because I'm a twin. And my sister is married and she has a son. And of course, people ask you all the questions when she was leading up to her marriage. And of course, when she was having a baby, like, well, what about you? And when is this going to happen? But I remember really when she had my nephew, I think she went through that exact feeling of like, I'm not just BJ's mom. I'm not just Ben's wife. I offer so much more to the world as well. And I think for you to include women in that conversation to say, wait, this is not just for the child-free or the childless. This is also to echo those thoughts and sentiments that so many women feel who have already had children.
Right, exactly. It's very much about, just empowering women to choose our own identity, I suppose, and retain autonomy over how we want to live our lives.
I love that. But this is a subject that has been following you for quite some time because you were approached with, covering this women without kids topic in your 30s.
Oh yeah, multiple times. So my background is in journalism, and I guess I've always been, drawn to writing about sort of cultural trends, social trends. I've always just been really fascinated in big shifts in society and what they say about our lives as individuals. So one of the reasons I wanted to write on women without kids now is because actually the birth rate, meaning the number of children that women have, is decreasing massively in every single country around the world, every single country. And so as much as we think about women without kids as being the outsiders, it's actually becoming much more common. And the later women leave it until they have a child, the fewer children they'll have. So families are becoming smaller across the board, and increasingly it means people aren't having children for all sorts of different reasons. But yes, as somebody who had always been quite confidently pursuing an alternative path to motherhood. I got married when I was 27, which was actually quite young from where I was growing up in London, and I was actually the first among my friend group to get married. And immediately people were like, so when are you going to start a family then? So when's that on the cards? And I was, at that point, I think, was the first time I really started to vocalize, I don't know if I want that. And I didn't know. I was questioning if that's what I wanted for my life. And at the time I was working as a magazine journalist in London, and multiple editors asked me to write about this unorthodox kind of, and it was sort of this, wow, that's odd.
The fact that
it wasn't like they really wanted to know. It was more like, let's just look at this odd person making this strange, bizarre life choice, you know?
Like, she is definitely not in the pack.
Yeah. And so I suppose that probably increased my feelings of alienation as a woman without kids. Although I still felt very true to myself. Like I always had an intuition that wasn't really my vocation. There were just other things that I was better suited to, you know? And so I quite confidently stuck to my no, even if throughout my 30s, the volume got dialed up on other people's kind of questions, projections, opinions about this decision. And so the more other people questioned me, the more I questioned myself. You can relate?
That's it.
Yeah.
You question yourself more because most people are looking at you like you are defective or something is wrong with you. But even with that conversation, in writing this book, it kind of unearthed some things in your own life about your own childhood, which played into your decision of not wanting to have children.
Yeah.
And this was really serving as this linchpin opportunity for you to serve as that linchpin for healing in your family.
Yeah. It's weird. That phrase, it was around the time I started removing alcohol from my life. Like you touched on, my last book was called Sober Curious. And that, again, was born out of a very personal journey around questioning my drinking. I didn't identify as an alcoholic, but I knew that alcohol had more of a hold on me than it was healthy or was good for me. And so through that process of removing alcohol from my life, which was in my kind of late 30s, early 40s, around the time, I have to say, that everyone was kind of like just busily engaged with raising their kids by this point and were far less interested in the fact that I didn't have children. But within that process, I just started to, get more clarity, I suppose, around the nature of like some dysfunction in my family. Ask some more questions about my relationship with my mom and the sticky points there, the impact of my parents' divorce, these sorts of things that I hadn't really looked too deeply into before. And I began to wonder like how much my family upbringing and the role that family played in my life had influenced my feelings about creating a family of my own.
What did you find? What did you kind of unearth?
You know, this is something I'd always known about my family, but until I put my conscious attention on it, I didn't really understand the impact of it. But we've never been a big, close-knit family. I don't really have a relationship with my aunts and uncles and cousins. I didn't really know my grandparents very well at all. And I think that for me, family just, it never really felt like this cozy, kind of warm, welcoming place. Family often felt like hard work. And actually I found a lot more security, stability, validation in my work, in my career. And with my husband too, I was able to create a very strong bond and what
that
felt like
family.
Our own little chosen family. And I think on reflection, I wasn't drawn to motherhood because that wasn't how I didn't experience family as something that I necessarily wanted to create or recreate in the same way. So it was very painful to have some of these realizations, like just realizing the impact of not really knowing my grandparents, never having had a hug from any of my grandparents.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
To me, that was normal.
Wow.
And my parents were both individually very loving. My mum's a real mumsy mum, and she created a really like secure base for us, emotionally especially. But yeah, family always, like I said, it always felt sort of like work. And I actually unearthed in writing this book quite a lot of what you could call family envy. You know, I got my hair blown out before coming here today.
Okay.
And the woman who was doing my hair was talking about how her son's birthday's coming up, and it's his 10th birthday. He really wanted to go on like a cruise, and the whole family was going. And she was like, there's 11 of us going to be on the cruise, 11 of my favorite people. And I was so like just happy for her, but realizing I've never experienced that in my life.
Wow.
And the loss of that, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a painful realization to have. But when I could actually see it and have some conversations with my mother, particularly about like how this would impact my feelings about having children, it became an opportunity for us to just talk about some of the more painful truths of our family and actually become closer as a result of those conversations, which has been such a beautiful, kind of unexpected side effect, I suppose, of writing the book. It's brought me a lot closer to my mom.
Because you talked about your mom's healing journey and kind of her journey that even took place in her later, you know, more seasoned years, her 50s and 60s, becoming a licensed therapist. Your mom became a therapist.
Right.
Yeah. So in kind of talking through that pain, did you find that your attention was more given to your mother and the lack that you all may have had as mother and daughter? And how did your father contribute to that?
Definitely. I think that my mother, of course, she always knew that there was a bit of a gap in our connection. We weren't necessarily very close.
Because you have a brother.
And I have a younger brother as well. I have two brothers. My dad has a brother with his second wife.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of normal. It was just how we are. I didn't necessarily feel a need to repair anything. But actually, I think really looking at the lack of that relationship in my life and how it had impacted my feelings about becoming a mother, it made me want to repair it. It made me want to create a deeper bond with my mom and actually look at the ways that I had stopped her love from coming to me, the way I'd blocked her, the way I'd shut her out, and the reasons I'd done that, which are obviously very personal, some of which I go into in the book. But I was very grateful, and I think it's because of the amount of work that she's done on herself. Like, she was in therapy for many years before training to become a therapist.
Yeah.
She was able to meet me in those conversations. It was challenging at first, but she understood that the more we could stay with it and actually really get to the root of our issues, the more opportunity we had for healing and for closeness, to create a closeness. And I can honestly say I feel closer to her now at age 47 than I have ever felt in my life. It's been really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's been harder with my dad. He's very involved still in his son's care.
Yeah.
My stepbrother has very serious disabilities, and my dad has become very, very much, for the past 27 years, been very much involved full time in his care. So that's been its own other, challenging family dynamic.
Yeah. Do you miss that relationship?
With my dad? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. And as much as I didn't experience a great deal of sadness when my parents divorced, it was very normalized. It was very amicable. My parents hadn't lived together since I was 1 year old, so I never even grew up with my dad in the house.
Yeah, you tell a story of how he would come over and spend time.
And he would spend weekends, and we would go spend weekends with him, and he was very present in our lives, but I didn't grow up with like a parental unit in the house, right? So when they officially separated, it didn't feel like, it wasn't that unusual. But yeah, again, reflecting on my experience of family, I've touched base with a lot of sadness around not having him there as a more constant presence in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally resonate with that. And I think this was also one of the reasons why the book just really resonated in my spirit so much. You tell the story in the book of one of your friends you were interviewing on her show. She's a lawyer, she's an author, but she's also a mother of two. And she really hadn't had those like strong feelings of wanting to be a mother herself. But she talked about how her father traveled a great deal growing up, and she saw the constraints of her mother and wanted the freedom that her father had. And when I read that, I was like, ooh, I feel like you hit into the subconscious of what my own life really mirrored, because my father wasn't present. He was building his career and doing all of the things that he was doing, which left us to see a mother who lived without sacrifice.
Right.
Her whole life was about sacrificing for us.
Yes.
And I was like, well, this shit does not look fun.
Right. And
he looks like he's having the fun.
That's the point I make in the book.
Yeah.
And the penny didn't drop, again,
Yeah.
until I was getting into the research of the book and sort of putting all the puzzle pieces together. But for somebody like myself, who was born in the 1970s, coinciding with the women's liberation movement, and now women could have careers, women could have credit cards, women could go to college, like women could pursue all sorts of different life paths. Rather than our mother being our only real role model for what it meant to be a woman, we could now look to our father and say, well, what's he doing with his life? Are there things that he's doing? And my dad's a lecturer, an author. He traveled a lot, to teach at different universities around the world. That's something else that I do as a result of writing books, which was never planned. But when I look at my life, my trajectory is much closer to my dad's. And of course, he had the freedom to do that precisely because my mom was at home
raising the children.
Yeah. And literally, not just doing the groceries, cooking the dinner, cleaning the house, like all of the labor that is an essential part of child rearing, which is still very heavily gendered, even in this, this era of supposed sort of like gender equality still. And I think the pandemic really shone a light on this, how much of that day-to-day emotional, mental load
goes to the mother.
Physical reality of child rearing lands on the shoulders of the mom.
Because you talk about that in the book. You talk about what the pandemic did and how women had to really come out of the workforce during the pandemic because they had to really take on the full-time duties of the home. Yeah. And you even speak to the point of saying how women without children are really our father's daughters.
Can be. Yeah. Some people have misread that, saying, what? Women without children bond more with their fathers? And that's not what I meant. What I meant is we had the option to follow in our father's footsteps as much as follow in our mother's footsteps. And that is like, honestly, for people born from the late 1960s onwards, that's like the first generation. So that's Gen X women who are now sort of coming into their 50s, reaching menopause, reaching the end of our reproductive years, and we're seeing like big drop-offs in the birth rate because these are the first generations of women, Gen X and millennial women, to have actually truly had that choice. Yeah,
because of our power of choice now. We have more opportunities for education. We're being exposed to more. And you really touch on that in the book.
And it really comes down to, so much of the second wave feminist movement was about enabling, not even empowering, but enabling women to be financially independent. Yeah. So that they didn't have to be dependent on men for their material survival. Yeah. Which meant enabling women to have careers, beyond just the very kind of menial, often again, caregiving focused labor that was considered women's work, whether it was teaching, cleaning, like much more sort of like nannying, etc. The very sort of like caregiving work that has traditionally been sort of women's work. Yeah. Only really from the 1970s onward did the doors to actual careers that come with career progression, 401ks, like job stability, like that is very new for women to have access to those kinds of careers.
Very new. But some things still remain very old, right?
Oh, yes.
And so the conversation around women who do not have children is seen as being defective in some way, because your original title to the book was not Women Without Kids.
It wasn't.
It was, what was it?
Do you really want me to say it?
I will say it if you don't say it.
Okay, when I first decided to write on this subject, the title literally downloaded into my brain almost instantly. It was Selfish Cunt.
Selfish Cunt. Yes.
Yes.
And you were like...
And this is why I didn't use that title, because it's hard for me to even say it. I'm like, no one's going to want to have me on their podcast to talk about it.
And listen, I was like, that would have been the perfect title for me to have on this show, because
I'm glad it gets
loved
your thumbs up.
It definitely got it, because in not just being seen as defective, but also that you were extremely selfish.
Uncaring, unnurturing, not loving, maybe defective in that realm, maybe don't know how to give love to another human being. And this is very ancient conditioning about like what a woman's honestly biological imperative is for, what our biology, the hormonal balance in our bodies like equips us for in this life, you know, which has very much been about women do the caretaking and the domestic labor, and men do the fighting and the kind of out there making a living labor, which, I mean, honestly, that can be equally oppressive to men, you know. So it can be equally
oppressing, and it really doesn't come, being child-free, childless, women without kids, does not come without its own challenges. Absolutely. Because you have experienced quite a number of challenges as a married woman without children. And even you speak to the point of saying how we don't feel like we're grown enough until we have children, right? People say, well, I'm going to grow up when I have children. And that doesn't necessarily mean that. But the challenges that you've experienced with your husband, even in his mid-40s, when he was really experiencing some corporate toxicity. Talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting, like the conversation, shall we have kids? My husband and I have been together for 25 years. So almost half of our, well, more than half of our lives at this point. So obviously we spoke about it often. Are we going to do this? Do we want to do this? And he had always been on the same page as me. And his reasoning had always just been very simply, it's so expensive. Having kids is so expensive. But I think that spoke to his unconscious awareness that as the man, he would be expected to be the provider, right? Yeah. And that was going to put a lot of pressure on him to maintain a certain like level in his career, and to really kind of prioritize that above all else. Yeah. And it was in his mid to late 40s, he really experienced a bit of a career breakdown, you know? He was in a very, very stressful corporate environment, and it brought him to a really low place, like a scary low place. And I remember just being like, please, you've just got to quit your job. You've just got to quit. And he was able to do that partly because we don't have children. Yeah. He didn't have the worry of like, well, without this job, we won't have healthcare. Yeah. What about the college fund? Like, what about putting food on the table beyond? We knew that between the two of us, we could make it work. Between my income and like, we could just get super thrifty and like, just make it work. Yeah. And we did, and we were okay. But I think if we had had children, not only the real financial pressure of continuing to need to be the provider, but just the kind of stigma around like what other people would say, you know, about his ability as a man to provide for his family would have been really ramped up, I think. So, yeah, I mean, in that instance, not having children gave him the freedom to quit his job, spend some time working on his mental health, and really figure out what he wanted to do next.
What did it teach you in that season about yourself, though? Because I'm sure that had to have been a really difficult season to navigate through as a wife, as a partner, as a support system for your husband.
What it made me realize is that as a woman, if I want equality, then I need to be prepared to step into that provider role sometimes myself.
You might need to say that again for people in the cheap seats.
If I say I want equality, then that needs to include me supporting my husband at certain times, you know, and that being okay, and me kind of stepping into that role. And I think one thing I've really realized, I think one of the reasons our marriage has stayed so strong for such a long time is that we really are each other's equals in the relationship. And I think that part of me knew that if I became a mother, our equality would be compromised. It wouldn't be the same dynamic between us. I wouldn't have the same freedom as him. I wouldn't have the same agency as him. Yeah. He would have more financial control in terms of the family matters, you know? So I think that being a child-free couple, we're able to really be each other's equals in the relationship.
I love that. I really love that, because even though your husband had the aspect and the thought that providing was one of the reasons why, you know, kind of laid in his mind of why he didn't want to have children, you knew at 23 years old, though, because you had an unwanted pregnancy at 23 and you decided to terminate that pregnancy. But you said during that season that it gave you your affirmative no.
Well, it was the first time it was the first time I was already confronted with, do you want to be a mother? Yeah. You know, in a very real, visceral way. I was 23, I just graduated college. I had been with who is my husband now. We'd been together for 3 months at that point. I also was fitted with an IUD, which I thought was the most effective form of birth control.
Have you seen those pictures of those memes with the baby? It's a picture with the baby holding the IUD up. Yes, like, ta-da, it's me, you got,
right.
Listen.
Right. So, I mean, it's not like I wasn't being careful or taking precautions, but I found myself in this situation. And yeah, it was the first time I really had to make the very clear-cut decision. Is this a yes for me or a no for me?
Yeah. And you said that was that no was your no into the life of freedom.
It was an affirmative no because it was a yes to something else. It was a yes to it. The no was also a yes to a different kind of a life. Now, you know what's interesting? If that happened to me in my mid-30s, when there was all the kind of talk around like your biological clock, where I was more established in my career, would I have made the same decision? I don't know. I honestly don't know, because even though I had an affirmative no about becoming a mother, like I said, just the pressure and the conditioning is so intense that maybe I would have made a different decision. I don't know.
Because sometimes in our minds, other people's voices ring a little louder than our own sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it does shift us in ways that we weren't.
And not only other people's, like there's just such a strong kind of societal voice that says, well, we were chatting about this before we got on camera. I mean, there's many things that people who don't have children, whether it's a definitely don't want to do this, or either I'm not sure if I want to do this, will hear. Among them are, you'll never know true love until you have a child. You will, what if you regret it? You will probably regret it. Like, you might feel like that now, but how will you feel when you're 50, 60 years old?
And there's nobody to take care of you.
And that's the last one. Who will look after you when you're old?
Because you can just guarantee that your kids are definitely going to take care of you, right?
And be happy about it. Or even outlive you. I mean, there's just no guarantee, right? As you kind of pointed out. But yeah, these are very, well, there's a sociologist called Orna Donat. She wrote an amazing book called Regretting Motherhood that I quote from throughout this.
You do. I mean, such a fascinating piece.
Such a fascinating book. So her book profiles, well, it reports the findings of a study where she interviewed, I think, between 20 and 30 women who would kind of come out and say, I regret having had children. Like, if I had my time again, I would not have become a mother, which is perhaps, I think, one of the biggest taboo subjects, right? But she describes that comment, which comes out so casually. But what if you regret it? Well, you'll probably regret it, you know? She describes it as a politicized use of emotion, because regardless of whether people intend it that way or are conscious of saying it in that way, the intention is to make you have kids or make you think, okay, I should probably safeguard against potentially regretting this at some point in my life, you know? So yeah, when you have all of that to contend with, maybe it's from family members, maybe it's from friends, but just kind of in the culture at large, you know, there's this idea that for a woman, and we don't necessarily, I don't think men experience this in the same way, but as a woman, if you don't have a child, somehow your life is incomplete. Somehow you have not done your duty. Somehow you have not fulfilled your potential as a woman. That message is so powerful and strong. And I think coupled with the fact that our fertility is finite, like it does have an end point.
It does have an end point with us.
That particularly in that kind of late 30s, even early 40s period, where it's really, really tense.
It's like,
I feel like
if you're gonna do it,
unless you're very, very strong, if you're in a position to have a child, then I think it's very easy to get swayed into deciding to go ahead with it.
Oh my God, when I was turning 40 last year, I felt the clock.
Right.
I mean, it is like the clock just turns on in your head and you're like, oh my God, Brandi, if you are gonna make a decision, you better start making a decision now. And I remember dating somebody last year right before my birthday, and I'm like, okay, this is probably the one. We could probably go ahead and just, you know, have some. And I met this guy out one time, and he's 52 years old. And he says, how old are you? And I told him, and he says, he said, let me give you a piece of advice. take yourself off the clock. Come off the clock. He said, when I turned 40, I thought, I need to have some more kids, like my legacy. He said, so I had 2 more children. He said, I had no business having those children.
Okay, wow.
He said, take yourself off the clock.
Wow.
And at 40 years old, I took myself off the clock. And I said, you know what? Let me allow life to unfold the way it's supposed to.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wise. What a wise man.
Met him at breakfast, girl. Random, ain't seen him since.
Amazing.
You know? He was there to serve
He was like
as
this messenger.
He was a messenger from the Lord.
But that's, I think, God, you could apply that to so many life situations.
Yeah.
You know, we live our lives thinking, got to hit this milestone.
Absolutely.
Got to get this point before I'm this age, etc., etc. And I was speaking to someone else who's consciously chosen not to have children, and we were reflecting on how past your 40s, past midlife, there aren't really those same milestones to reach anymore.
No.
And I think this can be a bit of a trigger for a midlife crisis in a way. It's like the only milestone that's guaranteed is the end of your life at that point, in a way.
It's the end.
Maybe, retirement, maybe getting sick or something. Like, it doesn't necessarily look good. There's not those same goals to aim for in life. And I actually think that one of the reasons people get so much fulfillment out of having kids is that once you have a child, you have all of their milestones to look forward to and celebrate. There's always something else to put your focus on, like their first day at school, their graduation, like them getting a job, them having a child. And it can kind of distract you from the fact that, like, there's no more milestones. So actually, you can kind of make it up as you go along, which we all can throughout our entire lives. But we live in such a way in our society that dictates very strongly, like, if you haven't hit these certain markers by a certain age, then you have failed, you're going to be unfulfilled, like things are going to go bad for you, which is it can be very limiting in terms of the life choices that we make.
Very limiting in life choices. You tell the story in the book of your friend who had some health challenges as she got older, and it was a medical decision that she had to make because she was no longer able to birth children. And she talks about in the book really, really clearly, saying that every decision that I've made up until this point, and me not having a child, is because I did not prioritize having children. Right. I didn't prioritize it.
I mean, she had a cancer diagnosis in her late 40s. Now, this is somebody she's a multidisciplinary artist. She's written multiple books. She's toured the world with rock bands. She's been a personal chef. She's just lived this incredible life.
Yeah,
of
very full.
Creativity, very full. She's traveled a ton. But it was only sort of facing her own mortality in a way that she realized she hadn't got around to having children, and that was actually something she had wanted all along. And I think she was feeling regretful in that moment, in a way of that relationship in my 30s that wasn't quite right, maybe I could have made it work and we could have had kids, right? Who knows how that would have played out?
Who knows?
Right?
Who knows?
So she was I think she was just in a moment of regret, looking at her life choices and reaching a point where she was, just feeling how things had gone, the things she hadn't got to experience, despite all of these amazing other experiences that she'd had. And feeling like, yes, I wish I had prioritized it more. And I think this is, with the more choices we have, the more agency we have, the more different avenues our life can take. And so we do need to get more conscious about the choices that we're making. Because she talks about that. She said, even in exploring that, she said that what did she say in the book? She said that she knew that for women that's what she said for the women who are on the fence, for the young women who are on the fence, it is not going to just happen. It's not going to just happen.
It's not going to just happen.
In the olden days, it just happened.
It just happened.
We didn't have access to
birth
reliable
control.
contraception.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were married off.
Yeah,
like
we
it was
did not
just
have the Flow app to tell you what are your high-risk days of getting pregnant.
Right. A lot of the time, it just happened. And so, now we have agency, we have control. it kind of goes the other way. Like if having kids is something we think we want, then we need to maybe make that decision and start making life choices that are going to make that possible for us.
Yeah. So we do not have
even
to
where
regret.
it's, you know, and there's a whole chapter really on choice, you know, how we make the choices in our lives. Things that aren't seemingly connected to having kids can lead to it being harder for us to have kids.
Yeah.
Like choosing to live in a city with high rents because of the career opportunities there is going to make it harder for you to afford to start a family, right?
Yeah.
Potentially living in a very kind of dense urban environment is maybe going to make it harder to meet somebody that you might want to start a family, that kind of a relationship with. So yeah, I think that's what she was saying. She's like, if kids is even 50% of a priority for you, then really be conscious of the choices you're making now and how that's going to shape your circumstances. It comes back to that thing about so many people who don't have children are childless by circumstance.
Yeah.
And maybe are kind of in their 40s looking back with some regret about like, oh, maybe I did need to prioritize this.
Maybe I did need to prioritize. And most people aren't. We aren't making that because of the exposure, because of our education, because we do have more options. We aren't making it a priority because we do believe that it will just happen some way, that it's just going to happen for us.
Right.
And I think even in my late 20s, early 30s, I think I had that very same idea.
Right.
Like it's going to just happen for me.
Yeah.
And I think even not meeting somebody that I wanted to co-create with and say, I want to make a human with you, you know, has really been my choice in not having children.
Right.
Yeah. Not having the person that I want to create with.
And you're definitely not alone in that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great reason not to have kids, actually, you know?
I think it's the perfect reason because we don't understand, like we are now, you know, and you talk about this in the book, we talk so much about parenting, and when you have the children, you'll just know, and when you have the children, it'll just grow you up and it'll just happen. It'll just all come together, just have them. And we can look at our own lives and see that parenthood did not make our parents more emotionally mature.
It did not.
Right.
Yeah.
It actually brought to the surface some things in areas that they really didn't have the capacity for. Yeah.
I mean, there is talk now of a whole sort of conscious parenting movement of people who are really using their role as parents to understand themselves better.
Yeah.
And to notice the things that are triggered, like the old kind of family patterns that are triggered in their relationships with their kids, like the way they talk to their kids. Shit, that's just how my mum used to talk to me. Why am I thought I was going to do it differently?
Yeah.
Who are consciously bringing awareness to then use that as a way to, okay, so I have some work to do.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that's really being spoken about much more often now, and I think that's incredible. And I think that my mum was an example of that in like the 1980s, before it was kind of widely being spoken about, you know?
She
was
giving
amazing to be the recipient of that healing work that she was doing.
Because she was giving you a voice in your home as a younger child growing up. But you talk about a 2022 poll that has come out. I was literally floored by this. 2022, it said that 50% of millennials and 7 out of 10 Gen Zers would rather adopt a pet than become a parent.
Yes.
I mean, wild.
It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
But, I mean, where I've been living in Brooklyn, New York, it seems like the dog population has just like exploded.
Listen.
So I can see the truth in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the number, when it comes to childless by circumstance or child-free by circumstance, the number one reason people give is, I can't afford to have a child, you know? And there are so many things playing into that. Wage stagnation, the gig economy, student loan debt, like all of these things, high rents are making it, the cost of living is high.
Yeah. And
especially if you're living in a city. This is something else I learned since the book came out. The more people that live in cities, the lower the birth rate. Because when you're living in a city, space is at a premium, right? And so every new human that you bring in, every kid is another expense, right? And so that's definitely one thing that's deterring people from having children.
Yeah.
And so I think the increase in pet ownership is people saying, well, I want to expand my family, and I want to experience like a loving connection with another being.
Yeah.
And a pet is a more cost-effective, I mean, to put it really bluntly, way of doing that. And you know, some parents might roll their eyes at that and just say, well, that's ridiculous to think you could have the same kind of a connection with a pet that you're going to have with a child. But on the other hand, I mean, people talk a lot as well with pets about it being a true experience of unconditional love.
Unconditional love.
You know? And that actually the bond that they feel with their pets is as strong, or not, if not stronger, than the bond that they feel with some of their family members, which can sound kind of ridiculous, but actually I think for a lot of people, considering the prevalence of family dysfunction, abuse in the home, all these sorts of things, like, I think there's a lot of truth to that statement.
So you talk about in some of your recent interviews that we're in a bit of a crisis of connection. We aren't connecting the way we used to because we do live in cities, communities look very different. We've kind of created these silos of just me and my partner kind of vibe. This is our unit.
Me and my pet.
Or me and my pet.
Yeah.
And so talk about, as we kind of move forward into these new ideas that you are disseminating, talk about that crisis of connection.
Well, this is something that social scientists have been talking about for many years. Social media and technology in general has played a big role in terms of people don't need to, you know, it's fantastic that we're able to have this conversation in person. We could so easily have done this on Zoom, right? It would have been so much more convenient in a way, right? And yet we wouldn't have had the same level of connection at all. And people are experiencing that in their work lives, in their family lives, kind of across the board. You know, for younger generations, there's a really clear link between mental health issues and the birth of social media, because people are just using social media platforms to connect versus actually connecting in person and getting that kind of three-dimensional, like, felt sense of a connection in addition to the very transactional connection that you have on social media. And I think this is probably playing into people feeling more isolated, people feeling like they don't necessarily have the support that they need to raise a child. I mean, it's quite an old-fashioned saying, right? But it takes a village to raise a child. It
really does,
And there's lots of philosophy around kind of parenting and what's the optimal conditions for a child is for them to have multiple adults who are kind of all connected in some way, who are all kind of working together towards the same goals, to be raised as part of a community. And so people are, I think, maybe even on an intuitive level, feeling like, well, I don't have a really strong sense of community. So if I bring a child into the mix, who am I going to lean on? Who am I going to call at 2 a.m. when I'm having a crisis? Like, if I don't even know my neighbors' names in this condo that I'm living in, which, I mean,
seriously,
you know, try saying good morning to anyone if you live in like a, you know, high-rise new condo. You'll get a funny look. So I think that unconsciously that's playing into people's not necessarily fears, but questions around, do I have the resources that I need to feel supported in raising a child? You know,
because I'm in a village. You know, my nephew I am in a village. You know, I'm a part of a village, in raising, in his becoming a full human. And
your sister has you to rely on for emotional
support. And we live 10
support.
minutes away, and it's very easy for me to say, oh, well, you're doing that, I can go pick him up from school, I'm on the list, you know. And so that does really speak to how important the community is in the rearing and raising of a child. And it's very important.
And I actually think that historically, villages have always had women without kids. There have always been kind of like spare women around to kind of help, you know, and to pick up some of the slack and to, I don't know, be the counselors or whatever those roles might have been. I think that, you know, humanity is designed for there to be some spare adults around who aren't kind of all consumed with the raising and the caretaking of their own physical offspring.
I loved how Stacey London was on your Women Without Kids podcast. And as a person who grew up watching Stacey and Clinton on What Not to Wear, you know, I was so like fascinated by her interview. And what she said was like, no, I am the auntie. Like, I'm the one that you can come over and get drunk at 16 years at my house. I was cracking up listening to her talk about it. She was like, I will take you to dinner, like go shopping with you. Like, that is where I fall in. But do not, don't expect me to be at all the performances and all of the little child soccer games and all the things. I'm not that auntie.
That's not who I am. Which is completely valid. Yeah.
But she gets to show up has her best self and offer to the village what she has to offer.
Yes.
As the person in the village. So as we kind of end out this conversation, I really want to talk about the texture of love, because that is something that I took from you. I will be using it when you guys hear it on the show now, henceforth and forevermore. You will know it's because of Ruby Warrington. And as I was listening to one of your interviews, and you were having a conversation with a gentleman who is a father of like 5 children, multiple children. And he tells a story, because you all were talking about the regret that many people feel, right? Or if you could possibly feel the regret, right? And he tells a story of how much love he felt with his child while he was laying in bed with her. She was ill. She was in so much pain. And he says, "Give it to me. I just want to take all of that." And he got really emotional when he told the story. And then you shared your own experience of that feeling, and saying that that you have made peace with not having that level of connection with another human, but you get to experience all of these other things. You just want to experience that texture of love. And girl, I was literally sitting on my couch watching YouTube, and I said, wait a minute, rewind it back. I will not experience that texture of love.
That specific texture of love, yeah.
But I get all these other things.
Well, this is the thing. It's one of the, I think, it's one of the most kind of impactful things that people can say to someone who's expressing a desire not to have children, or questioning I don't have a child, but you'll never really experience real love.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear that.
It is.
Right?
So hard.
Not just because of like what I won't have, but what does that say about me as a person, that I don't know or have a desire to kind of share that kind of love with another human being. So yeah, Jeff on that podcast, he was talking about that thing of just feeling this, like caring so deeply for his daughter that he just would do anything to take away her pain.
Yeah.
That real kind of like love, which is like the love of, I love you so much, I just want you to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it made me think about how, rather than there being one true kind of love, there are so many textures of love that we feel with different people and in different situations.
Yeah.
I think that I feel incredibly lucky that I get to write books for a living, and I've made a career out of something that I love doing. Like, I get so much pleasure and enjoyment out of writing and expressing myself in that way. And I can truly say I love my job. I think very few people can actually say that about what they do for a living. And I feel incredibly grateful that I have been able to prioritize this path and pursue that thing that I love so much, right?
Yeah.
So I could say to someone who's working a kind of a 9-to-5 corporate job, oh, but you should pursue your passion, because if you don't, you'll never know true love. Right, for what you do. Which would be equally cruel, because not everybody's in a position to find a vocation and pursue that kind of a career, right? That's just another example of how that kind of wording could be used, I suppose. But yeah, it made me think about how there are many different, you could say, flavors of love. And the love that exists between a parent and child is something I've made peace with, knowing that I won't experience that. But it's not to say that I don't experience deep love for my friends. A new kind of love that I'm experiencing with my own mother as a result of some of the conversations that have come out of this book. The love that I feel with my partner, the love that I feel for myself. Like, all of these things are true love. They're just different kinds of love. And somebody put something on Instagram, a comment on a post the other day, which was kind of discussing this subject that I thought was quite kind of smart. And she was like, if you haven't experienced true love before you have a child, please don't have a child.
Don't do it. This is not the time. This is not the time.
Right.
This is not the time.
So yeah, it's a cruel thing to say, actually. because it also disregards all of the very valid reasons that someone might have not been able to have a child. Imagine saying that to someone who's had fertility issues, but they don't feel comfortable discussing that with you in the moment, you know? Or somebody who's lost a parent and actually doesn't want to recreate that kind of love because it would almost be too painful. So people throw around these very big statements, very emotionally charged, very unconsciously. And one of the things I wanted to do with the book was to raise consciousness around all of the different reasons that people might be women without kids, and to respect each other's paths, choices, motivations, etc.
I love that. So you are a disseminator of ideas, and you talk about what's really next outside of the Women Without Kids conversation. There's another cultural topic that you are leaning into as you move forward, and that is menopause and aging, right? You're moving into that.
Well, I'm fascinated. There is a really new conversation happening around menopause, you know? Again, as Gen X women, who were, as we've discussed, like the first generation of women to really have agency and a voice around how we want our lives to look, our needs as women, right? And to have those prioritized and valued by the society at large, are saying, no, menopause isn't the end of my life. Menopause is like a whole new start. It's a whole new chapter.
Adulthood,
a second
womanhood.
Adulthood. So I found a book on menopause called The Silent Passage, and it was actually what sparked me wanting to write on this subject. Because I found myself in my early 40s looking ahead to menopause, having read this book, feeling actually quite excited about what this next life phase could bring. And that was so shocking to me, because everything I'd been led to understand was that it was just all downhill.
Doom and
from
gloom.
there. Doom and gloom. Game over.
It's over for you.
But the author of the book, Gail Sheehy, who's no longer with us, she died in her 90s, I think, during the pandemic, not of COVID, but old age. She presents it as quite an exciting life phase, you know, when women can experience a lot more freedom and agency and creative energy, etc. So I'm very fascinated about what it means to age as women without kids as well. So that is something I'm kind of looking into researching next. And I kind of, the last chapter of the book is called An Other Legacy. So it's talking about when we don't have children, what else can we create in our lives that's going to be beneficial to future generations?
What else can we create in our lives? Before you get out of here, one thing that you are grateful for in this season of your life?
Conversations like this. Like I said, I'm so grateful that I get to write books about the subjects I'm passionate about, so that they can start conversations, you know, among individuals, among communities and society at large, and hopefully shine more light and awareness into what we actually need as humans to live really fulfilling, happy lives, happy, healthy, healed lives. Happy, healthy, healed lives.
Ruby Warrington, thank you so much for joining us on Vault Empowers Talks. It has been just a phenomenal conversation. I'm so glad that we got to introduce this subject to our audience. You guys, Ruby Warrington's new book is Women Without Kids, The Revolutionary Rise of an Unsung Sisterhood. We got some signed copies for those folks who are going to ride with us. You're gonna like, comment, subscribe, and fill out that survey at the end. You might have a signed book on the way to you. So I'm excited for Ruby, this next big idea, this next cultural shift that you're going to walk into as we age and experience a new adulthood in our lives, but continue to live happy, healthy, healed lives, and that there is life without kids for women out there. Thank you for joining us on this conversation today. Until next time, it's your girl, Brandi Harvey. Eat well, give a damn, move your body every single day. Be healthy, happy, and healed, even without kids. Until next time, y'all. Peace.